Welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Thom Singer, and I've been hosting this show for about 2.5 years. And the idea was, when I went to work at the Austin Technology Council, we wanted just to start more dialogue. We wanted to allow people from small startups to mid-sized growth-oriented companies to larger companies to all be able to share what they're doing, because there's so many different paths that makes up the Austin technology scene, and so many different ways to find success. So every week we bring someone really interesting here, and we sit down and we talk about their story, we talk about their company, we talk about what they think Austin is doing right, and maybe areas we need to watch for the future. And today I am really excited because Jean-Ann Booth is joining us here on the show. Jean-Ann, how are you today?
I'm great, and thanks so much for having me here.
I'm glad to have you. So for those of you who don't know Jean-Ann, and you really should, she is the founder of UnaliWear, and we're going to learn a lot about this company coming up in just a few seconds here as we go. But she's also had a very eclectic career in technology here in Central Texas, dating back, I won't say how long, but dating back to the late 80s, and has really seen a lot of the changes that have taken place here in town. She started off working at AMD, and now she runs a startup. So she's seen everything from big to small. So Jean-Ann, let's go into the Wayback Machine. Let's go back to when you get out of college. How did your career start?
So actually, my career started in college. I'm an Army brat, a proud Army brat, by the way, and I couldn't afford to go to college, so I was in the co-op program at the University of Texas, and I worked at NASA every other semester. So when I graduated from college, I had 2.5 years of work experience. So that was the beginning. We so we'll do the how to do the Wayback Machine in a different way. We had some of the first network computers on the ARPANET. Okay, so that was when that was. Yeah, so it was a while ago. Then I left there when I graduated. I loved NASA. I loved it, but there wasn't anything that was going to make me live in Houston. So
nothing against Houston, but I once turned down a great job to not move to Houston.
Yeah. So it didn't take very long to figure out, especially back in those days, that Austin is where I wanted to live. And so I started actually for the first 2 years out of college, maybe 3. I was in industrial process control as a research and development engineer at what was then Fisher, what is now Emerson. Mm-hmm. And then left there after swearing in college I would never go into semiconductors. I ended up going to AMD, and I was at AMD for a decade. And then that was the beginning. Once I left AMD was the beginning of my entrepreneurial career.
So it's interesting because if we go back to the late 80s and early 90s, and especially if we go into the semiconductor side of tech, there wasn't really a lot of women in these tech companies at that time, right?
No, there really wasn't. And in fact, even I think we had 5 women in my graduating class in electrical engineering at the University of Texas. And I think we had like 1,000 students.
Wow.
So not very many. But, it just meant more opportunity for us.
Nice. So after 10 years at AMD, you said you sort of started to get that bug for entrepreneurship. A lot of people who work in big companies, they never want to leave the big companies. They love the big company life. What was it that made you say, what's on the other side of this fence?
The thing that made me do that is the fact that I'm always looking for more and faster. And so, my big company days were always great, but I was always the Maverick, right? So I was always in trouble because I was pushing everybody too hard, too fast, wanting to go places where they're like, let's see if that's going to work first, and I'm like, oh, it's going to work. Let's go. So, I guess the bottom line is, I was an entrepreneur and I just didn't know it, until I'd worked at AMD for a decade and then kind of went, it's time.
So what was the first step? What was your first entrepreneurial venture?
Oh, the first one was great. It was such a wonderful learning experience. I joined a company called Exponential Technology. Exponential was a semiconductor company, fabless semiconductor company. They were based in the Bay, but they opened an Austin design center. Back in the days when Steve Jobs allowed the cloning of the Mac, Exponential actually made the processor that was the one that the cloned Macs ran on.
Was it Motion? Was that the big company here in town that was involved with that?
No, Power Computing. Power Computing.
Yeah.
Yep, Motion was x86. So Power Computing was the company who was actually making systems using Exponential Technologies processors. And, Exponential, to their credit, realized that they had a very big limitation with respect to, hey, we're completely dependent on Steve Jobs. If we don't have the Macintosh ROM, we can't be a Mac. And so they created an Austin design center to build x86. The only problem was they were a little late doing that. So about 9 months after I joined, had nothing to do with me joining, Exponential Technology folded. That was because Steve Jobs took away the ability to clone the Mac.
Oh, I remember, because I knew people who worked at Powered. I remember, like, one day there was a company, and the next day there wasn't a product.
It was gone. Yeah. I mean, there wasn't anything you could do, right? I mean, so that was Exponential. We went without pay for a while. And then we ended up actually deciding that we wanted to start a new company rather than go work for somebody else. And so that was actually the beginning of Intrinsity. We originally started it as EVSX. And so I can't tell you what that stands for, but we later renamed it to Intrinsity. We had a semiconductor technology that was excellent for high compute data paths, like audio, video, that sort of thing. Perfect today for things like AI. And so what Intrinsity ended up doing was being the graphics unit in the first generation of iPads. And so when the iPads first came out, everybody's like, this thing, it's kind of cool. I don't know what you do with it, but did you see the graphics? That was Intrinsity. So nobody knew what to do with that kind of a thing, but they thought it was really cool. And so eventually, when the royalties get big enough, then Apple buys the company, and that's of course what happened with Intrinsity.
And then what was the next step after Intrinsity?
After Intrinsity, I did a small stint back in corporate. Actually, I was in Cirrus Logic and did some work with Cirrus Logic and their ARM microcontrollers. And they had spent a couple of years trying to bring some ARM-based microcontrollers to market, and they were struggling. So we got that fixed. Got all these parts out to market, introduced in designs, and I'm like, okay, let's go. We're gonna do the next one. And they're like, well, wait, we gotta get some of our money back first. We're not gonna do the next generation now. And of course, I've already told you I kind of want to keep going. so I left and started Luminary Micro. Luminary Micro was another fabless semiconductor company. We were the lead partner in the development of Cortex M3 microcontrollers with ARM. That was the first generation of the real microcontrollers based on the ARM architecture. We were actually lead partner for M3 and M4. And so that was a big deal because you had to do the whole ecosystem, all of the tools, all of the capabilities, reference designs, the whole 9 yards. And we ended up selling that one to Texas Instruments. And it, is still used by them today under a different name, though.
So one of the things I love when I run into you around town is you've had one of the best eclectic careers in tech of anybody I know. And I mean that in a complimentary way, because not everybody has the ability, to work in the big company, to have a startup, to go back to a big company, to come into a startup, to sell it to Apple, to do this, to do that. What do you think allowed you to have this life? Why were you able to sort of embrace this unique path in Austin's tech scene?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm really good at working in the big company. uh, so to the degree and in the times when a big company says, I want a Maverick, then I do well. But then they're going to reach that point where they want everybody to settle down and adhere to the planning cycle and do all of that sort of stuff. And I'm just not your girl. So when TI bought Luminary Micro, I actually told them that. I said, you guys don't want me. And they're like, no, we do want you. You're key man. And I'm like, well, actually, you really don't want me, because if it's broke, I'm going to fix it, whether you want me to or not. and they came to the independent conclusion that I was correct.
So before we move on to your current company, I want to talk about this idea of being a maverick, right? I think sometimes mavericks are overlooked. Is it something people can become? Because I think mavericks are a good thing. I think mavericks are how we discover new things. I think mavericks are how we get things done. I think mavericks are how we push through barricades. But sometimes, the mavericks get pushed off the cliff by the big company or whatever. But can anyone learn to be more of a maverick? Sometimes I wish I was. So is that something someone can learn?
Goodness, I mean, I wouldn't know, because I am who I am, right? But I think there's degrees of intensity in all things, right? So if you're 1,000% a maverick, then you're probably too abrasive to work with anybody, right? But if you're, not at all a maverick, partly what that might mean is that you're not passionate about any of the things that you do. And one of the things that is consistent with me is, if I'm not passionate about it, I'm not doing it.
Nice.
Right? So when I did Luminary Micro, the passion there was, we had an opportunity to consolidate a very fragmented microcontroller market to make it easy for engineers to build phenomenal products for their customers, instead of having to keep learning new languages, new tool chains, all of that proprietary stuff from the semiconductor guys. And I was very passionate about that, because it meant that you could take that creativity and make really cool products for people.
That's a great segue into my next question, because cool products for people takes me to UnaliWear. Now, if we think about everything that we've talked about and the different types of jobs that you've had, the different types of products that you've built, a wearable wasn't something that you were doing back in that time. How did you come across this idea? I think you started it in, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, 2013. See, my head does remember. That's, that's sort of early on in the wearable game, right? They weren't like now, it's kind of a common thing. You were kind of a maverick in the idea of doing something like that. But what led you to this product idea and this company?
Oh, it's definitely not kind of a maverick. So actually, when I left TI, I actually retired in 2011.
How's that going for you?
Well, it was great. It was great. I was a dive master on a liveaboard scuba diving boat, which is one of my passions. I love to dive. And I would have happily been on the boat had it not been for the fact that my mom turned 80. And you'd have to know something about my mom. She was a model. And, as much as I'm an engineer and an uber nerd, my mom was uber style. And so when she turned 80, if you reach that point in your life where you're kind of having those conversations with your parents, we had that conversation. Mom, I love you. I want you to be independent, but I want you to be safe. So how can I keep you safe, right? And still give you your independence, right? So I showed up as an engineer at her place in San Antonio, and I had a spreadsheet of all of the medical alert products that existed on the market, the very first of the passive monitoring systems with the cameras and stuff that spy on you, and I went through the whole thing. Mom let me go through the whole thing. Mom, look, this one has a blue button, and this pendant has a yellow button, right? And she let me do the whole thing.
And were these the black pendant type, just little plasticky pendant things?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I can see where I can see where this is going. Mom didn't love that.
Well, you know what? It's no different today. Sorry. The products haven't changed. And so mom, I get done with this whole spreadsheet. Mom looks at me and her teeth don't move. And she goes, "Don't you get that for me?" And I'm like, holy moly, you know? So I went away and had conversations with friends, as you do. And we came up with our patented battery system in the band. And so I called Mom and said, "Hey, Mom, how about if I make you a watch and you talk to it and it talks to you and it can help you out and keep you safe and independent?" And she goes, "I'd throw it out the window."
I think I know where you get your cantankerous maverickiness.
Yes, I'm pretty sure. In fact, before she passed, actually, Mom did admit that I'm more stubborn than her, just so you know, because we argued about that all of our lives. So anyway, once she said that, I told her, "Fine, you're hired." And she became our user experience advisor in the building of the Kanega watch at UnaliWear. And she was personally responsible for at least the first 100 of the 400 people who came through the focus groups that we did during design. And so much of what we do, Mom weighed in on and helped us understand, you know, it's seriously hard to put yourself in the shoes of a future you, right? You can sit there and say, you know, when I'm 80, I'm gonna whatever. And I promise you're wrong, right? Because you have no idea what it's like to be 80. I don't have any idea what it's like to be 80. The only thing I know is if you aren't talking to somebody who's 80 and you're building products for people who are 80, you better talk to them.
So that's how this all got started. So what's happened now over the last 12 years?
Oh, goodness. Over the last 12 years. All right. Well, so on the engineering and technology side, we came to market with our first generation in 2017. It was stainless steel, medical grade stainless steel watch. It weighed a quarter pound. Now, Mom weighed 85 pounds when she passed. She's not all that unusual. So you can see what our first problem was in not having product market fit because it was kind of heavy. Mom wore it, but that was only because she loved me. Nobody else would wear it. So we retrenched and pivoted, you know, actually did a new design and came to market right on top of the pandemic with our second generation Kanega watch. And this is the one that clearly has product market fit because 3 years in a row, New York Times Wirecutter has named UnaliWear's Kanega watch as the best medical alert.
That's a huge honor because that's a big and growing industry, right?
Well, certainly the population's a big and growing industry.
Yeah,
People above the age of 65 are 23% of our population in the U.S. And
I was going to say, with the baby boomers, there's just more people who are going to need such type things. So 3 years as the top one in that category. So what type of attention now has that brought you?
You know, it's brought us good attention. You know, certainly it doesn't hurt to have those accolades from Wirecutter. There are only two review sites that are completely independent, Wirecutter and Consumer Reports. Everything else you see, you know, top 5 best this, top 10 best that, you know, the best of this in the world, those are all ad plays, just so you don't, in case you didn't know. So it's a great honor that Wirecutter sees the value and the thought and care in which we created the Kanega watch to provide independence for our vulnerable populations.
So we've talked about this before, sort of at different things where I've run into you. Explain to me how the battery works, because that's the part I thought was so genius when it comes to how do you recharge and reflip the battery. And I would not do it justice.
Sure. So you have to know a little bit about, you know, silver tech, right? The technology of an elder population, and recognize that the number one cause of injury death is falls. The majority of those falls happen in the bathroom at night. So pendants don't work because you have to take them off at night because they're a choking hazard. right? Carrying your phone doesn't work, assuming you have one and assuming it's charged, because I don't know about you, but I'm not 80 and I don't take my phone to the bathroom.
No, and if you fall, I mean, your phone could end up out of reach anyway.
Exactly so. So we were talking about, how do we actually solve the true 24/7 problem? And that's when we came up with the battery system in the band. So we have these two batteries. There's one on either side of the face of the watch, and there's a safety battery inside the watch that's kept charged by the batteries that are removable. So the batteries last about 36 hours or so. You just change them every day when you're brushing your teeth, no big deal. And if they come out in a fall, because they're relatively easy to remove given our population, you still have enough power in the safety battery to get a GPS fix and spend 15 minutes on the phone with a medical alarm operator.
I think the battery thing of being able to change it out without taking the watch off and having it still be charged when you take it off to charge it and having ones to flip out. I remember when you told me that, I thought that's the most genius thing I've seen. I kind of wish my Apple Watch had that, because I love my Apple Watch, but my complaint about my Apple Watch is it only holds a charge for 24 hours, and then I've got to take it off to charge it. It would be great if I could just pop out a battery and pop another one back on. So I think that's one of the most genius things. So what's going on with the company? Where are you now? Where do you go from here?
Well, we're primarily direct to consumers, so we're just growing and growing and growing. We're in the scaling part of the business, and it's great stuff.
So where do you want to go with this? What's the next phase for the company?
Oh, goodness. There's so many places that we can go. And the question is, where do you get the alignment of capability and opportunity, right? So there are so many things that you can do on the healthcare side. Just to give you one example, things like hospital at home. So, in that particular application, one of the biggest challenges is if you've got some sensors, blood oxygen, whatever, and the nurses need to get a hold of you as if you were in the hospital but you're at home, the problem is they're going to depend on your cell phone, which may or may not be charged, may or may not be near you, or you might be asleep and you're ignoring it, right? Mm-hmm. And so with a Kanega watch, you're always wearing your phone, right? Your Kanega watch goes where you go. So we're able to make it possible for the monitoring clinical staff to be able to get in touch with you if they need to, regardless of what's going on, right? So that's a really cool application. There's also some really cool things that we can do in support of Parkinson's disease. And again, it's all based on the fact that we have that battery system in the band, which means that we're truly there for you 24/7, which nobody else is. I mean, that issue, back when I started the company, we used to call it the Fitbit problem, right? So you'd get a Fitbit and you'd be really excited. You'd track your steps for a month, maybe two, and then one day you would have your Fitbit off on the charger and you'd head off to work and you'd realize you forgot your Fitbit. But it isn't a big enough deal to make you turn around and go back and get it. And once it came off, it stayed off. Mm-hmm. And that was the Fitbit problem that we were trying to solve, because I can't save your life if you're not wearing the watch.
Right. So you've done so many things in your career. What advice do you have for sort of younger people who are, trying to figure out their path in the world of technology? Maybe they have a startup, maybe they work for a bigger company and have a dream of a startup or a combination. What advice would you give, or maybe what advice do you wish you'd had?
Oh, goodness. I think, the biggest, advice, sometimes there's a lot of articles about, startup life, and it's so exciting, and these people, they made all this money, and and the thing you have to keep in mind is they're writing those articles because that never happens. Well, and nobody wants to read an article about what happens all the time. And
we do have a problem in our culture is we do celebrate the outlier. We do celebrate that right. One person who just, bam, everything falls into place from the universe. So So continue on with what you were saying.
So the real question is, if you decide that you want to be an entrepreneur, or that you have an activity, a product, a solution that you're passionate about, make sure that you are truly passionate about it, because it's a really hard road. It's a very long road. And here I pass the advice from my best friend, one of my college roommate, actually, one of the 5 EEs. And Arlene says, when you're doing a startup, one of the big questions is you're always on the brink of going out of business, right? I mean, Worley says it as startups are in only one of 2 phases. They're either out of business or struggling, right?
That's
and
right.
I'd always be like, I'm happy to be struggling.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not out of business. So as Arlene would say, when you go through those phases where you're trying to decide, have I made a mistake? Does nobody want this? Right? Then the question really is, are you out of paths to go down? Right? Is there anybody else you can talk to? Any other things you can do? And she would ask that of me, and I'd be like, I could go back and talk to these guys. I could go and talk to that one. And she'd go, well, you're not done yet. And so here we are, 3 years in a row, Wirecutter's Best Medical Alert.
Nice. So
Thanks, Arlene.
You bring something up. Is there someone else you can talk to? Is there someone else you can go? How important? Let me preface this. One thing I really love about you is there's a lot of people who've been successful for 20, 30 plus years in our community who don't show up. One thing I really admire about you, and I say it all the time, is that leaders show up in the community, and you still go to networking events. You still support things in the community. How important do you think that is for people in the tech world and in entrepreneurship?
Oh, I think it's critically important. To the extent that I've had successes, I mean, they were not me. They were, the helping hands from all of the people who helped me. So when I show up, and I do, thank you for saying that, I do it intentionally because it's a part of giving back. And I think that that's critically important. My goal is for the people that I talk to, and, some of the pithy little advice things that I share, I want them to make my successes look like, just barely popcorn, right? I want to see them go so much further and so much better on the, helping hands of the people who got me where we are, and then my helping hand to take them even higher.
And I think it's such an interesting thing because in Austin, I've been here 34 years, and I've seen sort of tech generation after tech generation learn from the mentors before them, who learned from the ones before that. I mean, you can trace from Dr. George Kosmetsky forward in this community 5 or 6 levels over the past 50 years of people who have been sort of mentored by somebody who was mentored by somebody who was mentored by somebody, et cetera. And I fear sometimes that the next generation isn't getting as much of that, because I do think less and less people sort of show up. So as we move over to sort of what do you think is going on with Austin, let's talk about where do you think Austin is right now, and what do you think we need to grasp onto to keep succeeding?
So when I look at Austin, so just to give you an idea, when I moved to Austin in some year, there were 400,000 people in the metro area, and I think I read a report not long ago that said we're 3.5 million now.
2.5 million is the last thing I saw.
2.5 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So 400,000 to 2.5 million. That's just a small amount of growth.
And we've built one road in that time, so there's a little bit of a traffic problem now.
Okay, I must confess, I was a part of If We Don't Build It, They Won't Come.
Oh, that's a whole other podcast. They came anyway.
Yeah, they did. They absolutely came anyway. But you know what? Actually, the growth, I think, has been really good for us, because when I was doing my first semiconductor company, we didn't have the diverse ecosystem that we have today, right? So you could work at AMD, you could work at IBM. I'm running out of companies here. Now you've got Apple, you've got Google, you've got Oracle, you got Meta, you got AMD, you got NXP, and a huge, vibrant startup community. I mean, I haven't heard anybody say anything like, oh, I live and fly over Austin in at least a decade, but we used to complain about that all the time. So having both the big companies and the startup ecosystem gives us that pathway for people to do like what I did. I mean, the articles will tell you everybody, comes out of college and becomes an entrepreneur and is immediately successful. Okay, well, I worked in industry for 12 or 13 years before my first startup. And I'm actually not that unusual. It's just you don't hear about that.
Right.
So the second thing I think that is great about us is we have some really cool groups of folks, right? So Tech Ranch, Capital Factory, Div Inc., Austin Technology Council, all of those opportunities to get critical early stage support, along with stuff like, the Texas Venture Labs at UT. And that really helps as well. When you talk about UT, of course, you also got to talk about the fact that the university is quite an advantage because we get the graduates who we can bring into our companies while we continue to pull in people from the places where, when I used to say, if we don't build it, they won't come, they still come in.
Well, and it is true with the university. It used to be people graduated from UT and wished they could stay in Austin. And in many cases had to move away for a while. Some came back, but there wasn't a lot of, I moved here in 91, so I came there were 700,000 people, but there wasn't a lot of jobs for people to stay. We don't have that problem now. Austin is a place, if you want to stay in Austin, there's opportunities for you. And that is great because we have world-class university. The business school and the engineering school are top 10 in the United States. I mean, that's a huge thing to have right here. And so my belief is all of these organizations, be it Capital Factory, be it the university, be it Austin Women in Technology, be it the Chamber of Commerce, be it Austin Technology Council. I mean, the list is huge. The one thing I think we all need to do is we need to start working closer together, because the more we can bring all of these groups together so everybody can kind of thrive in their lane, the more I think that our future looks bright, because I deeply believe we're not done. I mean, it's fun to grow something. It's not as much fun to maintain it. But I think Austin needs to realize we're not in maintain mode. We're in like 12th grade on our way to a PhD. Yeah, 12th grade's cool, but we still have a lot of growth to do moving forward. And I think we have to recapture that sort of umph in our vibe that we're growing something here.
I agree. And actually, what I was going to say, the final thing that I think makes us different, especially having spent a lot of time, especially in the Valley because of semiconductors, is, we're much more a rising tide lifts all boats kind of place, right? So it'd be great if all of the organizations worked really closely together. I agree with you on that. But nonetheless, when you do talk to people, nobody says, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to help you. I'm too busy. I'm going to compete with you. And if I talk to you, maybe they're going to fund you instead of me. So I'm not going to talk to you. And I've heard that stuff in the Valley before.
Yeah, there's definitely much more here. There's definitely much more like fiefdoms, for lack of a better term, little cycles that don't like each other, don't talk to each other. In some cases, don't know each other. I was talking to somebody out of New York who just had discovered a group that was just like theirs, and they'd both been operating for years, and neither one knew the other one existed, and they were both successful little tech nonprofits. And it's like, I couldn't imagine not knowing who the other tech nonprofits were in Austin if they'd been around for a while. So I do think Austin has that, and I think we have to fight to keep that. I think that is our secret weapon. I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we fight to keep that, I think there's a couple of things to remember. So remember, I've been here since we evolved from, the startup system was only hardware and semiconductors, right? And then we were all B2B SaaS software. And, now we've got companies doing AI and clean tech and digital health. I think we're at a phase where we're maturing, which is great. But I agree with you, we're not done yet. And so I think we're going to see more of the mid-stage companies reaching significant scale. I look forward to that very much because that's a virtuous cycle,
Yep.
right? And it creates that experience, talent, and reinvestment that actually drives the next generation of technology. And I think a lot of those people are going to stay here and build, which for a while people didn't do that. Mm-hmm. Even if you exited well here, you'd go back to the Bay to get funded and then come back to Austin to actually make it happen because everybody wanted to live here and not in the Bay.
Well, I think you've got the right idea on where Austin is and where Austin's going. As we wrap this up, is there any last things you'd like to say to just anybody in general who's listening? Any last words of advice?
Just one for the startup people. So, oftentimes you end up being in one of those places where all the startups are around, maybe at the A-list awards or something like that. And you're hearing this list of accomplishments and what they just did and who they just signed. And the thing that I would ask you to remember is never compare your reality to another startup's PR.
I don't know that I've heard that line before, and I love that line. That is a great way to end this podcast. So, Jean-Ann, thank you so much. I always like talking to you, but thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your brilliance. If somebody wants to learn more about you, they want to learn more about UnaliWear, how can they find you?
You can find us on the web at www